Welcome back.
To your wife.
This week we are going to look at chapters 10, Hope, and chapters 11 and 12, both titled Faith. Now, hope means like you're hoping for a better tomorrow. You're hoping that the future is going to be a little bit better. And now that's kind of a weird virtue to have for Christians, considering how likely suffering is to be in the future and how certain death is going to be in the future. So Christians really have the ultimate hope of heaven, which is infinite happiness which overcomes death. So the hope of heaven is the ultimate hope.
But hope's kind of a funny word.
It
It
is.
implies things could not go well.
Yes, it does. So Lewis starts off the chapter on hope, that hope is one of the theological virtues. This means that a continual looking forward to the eternal world is not, as some modern people think it is, a form of escapism or wishful thinking, but one of the things a Christian is meant to do. It does not mean that we are to leave the present world as it is. If you read history, you will find that the Christians who did most for the present world were just those who thought most of the next. The apostles themselves, who set on foot the conversion of the Roman Empire, the great men who built up the Middle Ages, the English evangelicals who abolished the slave trade, all left their mark on earth precisely because their minds were occupied with heaven. It is since Christians have largely ceased to think of the other world that they have become so ineffective in this one. Aim at heaven, and you will get earth thrown in. Aim at earth, and you will get neither. It's kind of a strange rule, but you can see it in other things. If you make health the main concern of your life, you're probably not going to be very healthy. You're probably going to go around always thinking there's something wrong with you. You only get health if you learn to want other things more. Exercise, relationships, fun, work, open air. A person who's always watching himself to see if he falls asleep is never going to fall asleep. Now, most people find it difficult to want heaven at all, except so far as heaven means meeting our loved ones who have died. One of the reasons is that our minds have been trained to, all throughout growing up, and our society is always pushing this on us, to focus on this world. The second reason is when a desire for heaven is in us, we don't recognize it. Lewis says, most people, if they had really learned to look into their own hearts, would know that they do want, and want acutely, something that cannot be had in our world. Lots of things in life promise to give it to us, and they all fall short. We all have an itch that nothing in this world quite seems to scratch. We all have a hankering for something that nothing in this world can quite satisfy. The longings you feel when you first fall in love, or imagine a foreign country, or take up a new hobby, are all longings that no marriage, no country, and no hobby can really satisfy. We're not now talking of what might be called unsuccessful marriages or hobbies, but the best possible ones. Your spouse may be a very good one, and the country you go to may be very beautiful, and your hobby interesting, but something has still evaded you. Now, Lewis says, there's two wrong ways to deal with this, and one right one. The first of the wrong ways is called the fool's way. The fool blames the things themselves. They think that a new spouse, or a more expensive vacation, or a different hobby will mean that they can really catch the mysterious something that we're all after. He says most of the bored, discontented rich people in the world are of this sort, trotting from marriage to marriage, from continent to continent, to hobby, always thinking the latest thing they found is the real thing, and always disappointed. The second wrong way to deal with this phenomenon is what Lewis calls the way of the disillusioned, sensible man. He decides the whole thing is moonshine. Right? It's all right for someone younger right, who doesn't know any better, but once you get to be my age, you learn not to expect too much. Now, this man is better than the first. He tends to be happier and less of a nuisance to others. He may also be a bit stuck up, but by and large, he rubs along fairly well on his own. But, Lewis says, suppose infinite happiness really is there. It'd be a pity to find out a moment after death, when it was too late. Finally, there's the Christian way. The Christian says, creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. A baby feels hunger. Well, there's such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there's such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire. Well, there's such a thing as sex. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. If none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, that does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. If that is so, I must take care, on the one hand, never to despise or be unthankful for these earthly blessings, and on the other hand, never to mistake them for the something else, of which they are only a kind of copy, or echo, or mirage. I must keep alive in myself the desire for my true country, which I shall not find till after death. I must never let it get snowed under or turned aside. I must make it the main object of life to press on to that other country and to help others to do the same. That was chapter 10 on hope. It was a short chapter, so we're going to spend most of this week talking about chapters 11 and 12, faith. Now, faith...
What was the one the title of the one we just did?
Hope.
Oh.
So now we're going to look at 2 chapters on faith. Now, faith in Christian terminology can be used in 2 different senses, and we're going to take them in turn. The first definition just means belief, accepting the Christian doctrines as being true. And Lewis says, this used to puzzle me. How could it be virtuous? What is there moral or immoral about believing or not believing a set of statements? Surely, a person believes whatever they think the evidence is best for. If a person was wrong about the evidence, well, that doesn't make him evil, just not particularly clever. And if someone tried to force themselves to believe in spite of the evidence, well, that would be merely stupid. Yes, what did I not see? Well, he realized, years later, that he was assuming the human mind, once it accepts a thing as true, will automatically go on believing it's true until some real reason against it comes up. Lewis says, in other words, I was assuming that the human mind is completely ruled by reason. But we know that's not so. Lewis says, for example, my reason is perfectly convinced by good evidence that anesthetics do not smother me, and that properly trained surgeons do not start operating until I am unconscious. But that does not alter the fact that when they have me down on the table and clap their horrible mask over my face, a mere childish panic begins inside me. I start thinking I am going to choke, and I'm afraid they will start cutting me up before I am properly under. In other words, I lose my faith in anesthetics. It is not reason that is taking away my faith. On the contrary, my faith is based on reason. It is my imagination and emotions. The battle is between faith and reason on one side, and emotion and imagination on the other. We have plenty of examples of this. Lewis says, imagine a man who knows a certain girl shouldn't be trusted. He's been around her before, he's been attracted to her, and he opens up to her, tells her something he shouldn't, and every time gets burned. This has happened many times. He knows, on good evidence, that this girl isn't one that should be trusted. But the next time he's around her, He starts thinking maybe this time it'll be different. He can't help himself. He opens up and once again gets burned.
Hoping.
He's hoping. His emotions have overwhelmed his faith in his knowledge that she ought not to be trusted. Lewis says, or take a child who's learning how to swim. He knows perfectly well that people don't necessarily sink. In fact, there's no shortage of examples around him at the pool. But will he go on thinking so when the instructor pulls his hand away? Lewis says, now, I'm not saying that anyone should accept Christianity if their reason tells them not to. If they think the evidence is not for Christianity, they're right to not believe it. But suppose you think the evidence is for it. Suppose your reason does accept it as true. Lewis says, I can tell you what's going to happen in the next few weeks. There will be a time when you get some bad news, or you get in trouble, or you find yourself among people who are not Christians, and your emotions will rise out and carry up a sort of blitz on your belief. Or the moment will come when you want a woman, or you want to tell a lie, or you want to get money in a way that's not exactly fair. In other words, a moment will come when it would be very convenient for Christianity to be untrue. And once again, your emotions will carry out a sort of blitz. Now, faith, in this sense, is the art of holding on to things your reason has once accepted in spite of your changing moods. For moods will change, whatever view your reason takes. I know that by experience. Now that I am a Christian, I do have moods in which the whole thing looks very improbable. But when I was an atheist, I had moods in which Christianity looked terribly probable. Unless you teach your moods where they get off, you can never be either a sound Christian or even a sound atheist, but just a creature dithering to and fro, with its beliefs really dependent on the weather and the state of its digestion. Consequently, one must train the habit of faith. The first step is to recognize that your moods do in fact change. The next is to make sure that if you have accepted Christianity, then some of its main doctrines shall be deliberately held before your mind for some time each day. That is why daily prayers and religious reading and church-going are necessary parts of the Christian life. We have to be continually reminded of what we believe. Neither this belief nor any other will automatically remain alive in the mind. It must be fed. And as a matter of fact, if you examined 100 people who had lost their faith in Christianity, I wonder how many of them would turn out to have been reasoned out of it by honest argument. Do not most people simply drift away? Now, this brings us up to the second sense of faith, which Lewis says this is the hardest thing I've had to talk on yet. So we're going to pump the brakes a little bit and lay some important foundation. Last week, we talked about pride and about acquiring humility. And Lewis says the first step to acquiring humility is to realize that you are proud. Well, he then goes on to say the next step is to seriously try to live out the Christian virtues. He says 1 week is probably too short. Things often go, his word is, swimmingly for the first week. Try 6 weeks. At that point, you will have discovered certain things about yourself. The first big one is that you will have failed. You have failed horrendously, being as low as you were when you started, or perhaps even lower. You will learn a certain truth. He says, it's a very silly idea to think that good people don't know what temptation means. There are some bad people who point at good people and say, you've never suffered real temptation. You're only good because of your naivety. And undoubtedly there are some good people who are good merely because they're naive. But Lewis says, evil people, bad people don't know what real temptation is. Okay? You only know how strong something is by standing up against it. by resisting it. He says, you don't find out how strong the German army is by surrendering. You find out how strong it really is by fighting it. You find out how strong a wind is by walking against it, not by laying down. A man who gives in to temptation after 5 minutes simply doesn't know what it would be like after an hour. Thus, in a sense, bad people are sheltered by temptation. They've never actually had to fight it the whole way. You never find out the strength of an evil force until you fight it. And thus Christ, being the only one who never sinned, was the only one who really understood temptation, the world's only complete realist. But let's go back. The thing you'll learn is that you failed. If you had an idea of a test that God had laid out, and your job is to try to earn good grades, or a bargain where you're trying to put God in your debt, these ideas have to be blown to bits. God knows this. One of the jobs of Christianity is to blow these ideas to bits. But here's the second thing you'll learn. Every faculty you have, your intelligence, your creativity, your will, your muscles, the atoms in your body, your money, your job, your house, your family, your biology, everything you have comes from God. If you devoted every moment of your life exclusively to His service, you couldn't give Him anything that wasn't, in a sense, already His. Lewis says, here's an analogy, and I really like this analogy, and so I don't usually do this, but I'm going to ask you to pay real close attention. Imagine a young child who goes to its father and says, Daddy, give me $5 to buy you a birthday present. Now, the dad is somewhat amused by this, but also is pleased with the child, so he does so. And the child goes off, buys a birthday present, and gives it to the father. And all is well. But only a fool would think the dad is $5 richer after the transaction. Right? In other words, you have to discover our bankruptcy. Suppose the child took the $5, but on the way to buy a present, got distracted and went into the candy store and spent all the money. Now what is the father to do? We are in this horrible predicament where we can accrue debt. We can spend the money on the candy store, but we cannot generate our own credit. We can't do anything on our own to give money back to the Father. Now this leads us right into chapter 12. Now, Lewis says it's important to remember that God doesn't precisely care about your actions. He does, but only because your actions change who you are inside and are manifestations of who you are inside. He doesn't precisely care about your actions. He cares that we be creatures of a certain type, related to Him in the proper way. And Lewis says, you might say related to each other in the right way, but that's assumed. If two creatures are related to God in the same way, or in the proper way, they will be related to each other in the proper way. In the same way, if you fit two spokes into a wheel properly, that is, they're in proper relationship to the hub and the wheel, the two spokes will be in relationship to each other properly. If we are still thinking of God as a test giver, we are not in the right relationship yet. We have to really discover our bankruptcy. Not repeat it back parrot fashion, because we can teach kids to say they have nothing to give God except what God has already given to them. You have to really understand it. And the way you really understand it is by really trying and then failing. Unless we really try, whatever we say, there will always be at the back of our minds the idea that if we try harder next time, we shall succeed in being completely good. Thus, in one sense, the road back to God is a road of moral effort, of trying harder and harder. But in another sense, it is not that trying that is going to ever bring us home. All this trying leads up to the vital moment at which you turn to God and say, "You must do this. I can't." Lewis warns us, don't start asking yourself, have I reached that moment yet? Right? That'd be the quite wrong way to go about it. He says, the important things in life often happen when you don't notice. You probably, when you were growing up, never looked at yourself and said, "Hello, I'm growing up." Right? The important changes in life are gradual. They take place, and it may be that you couldn't point to a particular month or even a particular year in which the change took place. Lewis says, what really matters is the nature of the change itself, not how we feel while it is happening. It is the change from being confident in our own efforts to the state in which we despair of doing anything for ourselves and leave it to God. I know the words "leave it to God" can be misunderstood, but they must stay for the moment. The sense in which a Christian leaves it to God is that he puts all his trust in Christ. Trusts that Christ will somehow share with him the perfect human obedience which he carried out from his birth to his crucifixion. That Christ will make the man more like himself, and, in a sense, make good his deficiencies. In Christian language, he will share his sonship with us, will make us, like himself, sons of God. In Book 4, I shall attempt to analyze the meaning of those words a little further. If you like to put it this way, Christ offers something for nothing. He even offers everything for nothing. In a sense, the whole Christian life consists in accepting that very remarkable offer. But the difficulty is to reach the point of recognizing that all we have done and can do is nothing. What we should have liked would be for God to count our good points and ignore our bad ones. Again, in a sense, you may say that no temptation is overcome until we stop trying to overcome it. Throw up the sponge. But then you could not stop trying in the right way or for the right reason until you had tried your very hardest. And, in yet another sense, handing everything over to Christ does not mean that you stop trying. To trust him means trying to do all that he says. There would be no sense in saying you trusted a person if you would not take his advice. Thus, if you have really handed yourself over to him, it must follow that you are trying to obey him, but trying in a new way, a less worried way. Not doing these things in order to be saved, but because he has begun to save you already. Not hoping to get into heaven as a reward for your actions, but inevitably wanting to act in a certain way, because a first faint gleam of heaven is inside you already. Now this brings us up to a very unfortunate and prominent fight among different Christian denominations. Which is more important, faith or good works? Lewis says, this is a bit like asking which blade in a pair of scissors is most necessary. Okay? Serious moral effort, that is to say good works, is the only thing that will bring you to the point where you throw up the sponge. Faith in Christ is the only thing that will save you from despair at that point. And then, out of that faith, good actions must come. There are errors made by two sets of Christians. The first say, good works are all that matters. The best kind of works is charity. The best kind of charity is giving money. The best thing to give money to is the church. So give us $10,000 and we'll see that you're all right in the end. The answer to these people is that money given for that reason is not good works, but merely selfish financial investment. The other group of Christians are those who say that faith is all that matters. Consequently, it doesn't matter what you do. Sin away and have a good time, and Christ will see that it makes no difference in the end. The answer to these people is that if faith in Christ doesn't mean listening to anything he said, then it's not really trusting him. It's just theoretical acceptance of a certain set of statements about him. Lewis says that the Bible winds it all together in and I've seen Lewis quote this in another book, and he identifies it as one of his favorite verses, but it's Philippians 2:12 and 13, where it wraps these two ideas together. It reads, "Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling," which makes it sound like it's all on us. But then it says, "For it is God who works in you," which makes it sound like it's all on God. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you. Lewis says, I am puzzled, but not surprised. You see, we are now trying to divide up what exactly it is God does and what it is we do. Now, this works with people. If a bunch of us collaborate on a project, we could say that I did my part and you did your half and they did that bit. But that's not how God works. He works inside you as well as outside you. Even if we could understand it, it may be that language is unable to express it. In the attempt to express it, different churches say different things. But you will find that even those who insist most strongly on the importance of good actions tell you you need faith. And even those who insist most strongly on faith tell you to do good actions. At any rate, that is as far as I go. I think all Christians would agree with me if I said that though Christianity seems at first to be all about morality, all about duties and rules and guilt and virtue, yet it leads you on, out of all that, into something beyond. One has a glimpse of a country where they do not talk of those things, except perhaps as a joke. Everyone there is filled full with what we should call goodness, as a mirror is filled with light. But they do not call it goodness. They do not call it anything. They are not thinking of it. They are too busy looking at the source from which it comes. But this is near the stage where the road passes over the rim of our world. No one's eyes can see very far beyond that. Lots of people's eyes can see further than mine. With that, we are done with the section of the book on Christian behavior or morality. Next week, we will start the section of the book that I said is on theology, which is titled Beyond Personality, or First Steps in the Doctrine of the Trinity. So in it, we're mostly going to look at the idea of the Trinity and of humankind's relationship to its Creator. We'll start with Chapter 1, Making and Begetting. Chapter 2, The Three Personal God. Making and Begetting.
Okay.
Chapter 2, The Three Personal God. And Chapter 3, Time and Beyond Time. But for now, that's all I have to say about that.